What if a single moment of kindness could rewrite your entire life? Not in a fairy tale way, but in a real gut-wrenching and dramatic fashion. For Elena, a 26-year-old waitress, drowning in debt and family medical bills, a normal rainy Tuesday was about to become the ultimate test of her character. She saw an elderly woman collapse in her diner. She didn't see money or opportunity. She just saw a person in need. But she had no idea who this woman was, or that her powerful, suspicious son was about to turn Elena's life upside down, forcing her to prove that her simple gesture of humanity wasn't a calculated move in a game she didn't even know she was playing. The rain fell in relentless sheets against the large plate-glass windows of the Silver Spoon diner. It was the kind of Tuesday afternoon in downtown Oak Ridge that washed the color from the world, leaving behind a monochrome blur of hurried pedestrians and slick black asphalt. Inside the diner was an oasis of warmth and greasy comfort. The air was thick with the scent of brewing coffee, sizzling bacon, and the faint, sweet perfume of pancake syrup. For Elena Rostova, this was the soundtrack of her life. At 26, she moved with an efficiency that bordered on exhaustion, her dark ponytail swinging behind her as she navigated the narrow aisles between worn vinyl booths. Her smile, though genuine, didn't always reach her tired grey eyes. 2 jobs this diner by day, a sterile office cleaning gig by night, were barely enough to keep her and her younger sister Maya afloat. Maya's cystic fibrosis was a storm cloud that never dissipated, a constant low-level hum of anxiety, punctuated by the sharp thunderclap of medical bills. Elena was refilling a salt shaker when the old woman came in. She was alone, dressed in a simple beige trench coat and a silk scarf that was probably more expensive than it looked, but didn't scream wealth. Her face was a delicate map of wrinkles, but her eyes were bright and curious as she surveyed the diner. She chose a small booth in the corner, shaking the rain from her coat before sliding onto the seat. "Just a cup of tea, dear," she said, her voice soft and cultured. "Earl Grey, if you have it." "Of course," Elena replied, offering one of her practiced smiles. "And a slice of our apple pie. It's fresh out of the oven. Best in Oak Ridge." The woman who introduced herself as Isabella chuckled. "You're a good salesperson. All right, you've twisted my arm. A small slice, please." Eleanor served the tea and pie and went about her duties, but she kept a subtle eye on the woman in the corner. There was a fragility about her, a slight tremor in her hands as she lifted the teacup. 15 minutes passed. Elena was taking an order from a family of 4 when she heard it, a sharp clatter of porcelain against the floor. She turned instantly. Isabella was slumped forward in the booth, her face pale as parchment, one hand clutching her chest as she gasped for air. Her teacup lay shattered on the checkered linoleum. For a heartbeat, the diner froze. The cook peeked out from the kitchen window. The family Elena was serving stared mouths agape. It was a scene of suspended animation, a tableau of shock. But Elena didn't freeze. Years of managing Maya's sudden health scares had forged an unnerving calm in her. While her manager, a portly man named Sal, fumbled for his phone to call 911, Elena was already moving. She rushed to the booth. "Ma'am Isabella, can you hear me?" Isabella's eyes fluttered open wide with panic. Can't breathe," she whispered, her breaths coming in ragged, shallow spurts. "Dizzy." Elena's training, learned in countless hospital waiting rooms, and from pamphlets she'd read while Maya slept, kicked in. She recognized the signs of a severe panic attack, or possibly a vertiginous episode, which could mimic something far worse. "Okay, Isabella, I'm right here," Elena said, her voice firm but gentle, cutting through the woman's fear. She knelt beside the booth, taking Isabella's trembling hand. "I need you to look at me. Just focus on my face. We're going to breathe together. In through your nose. 1, 2, 3. She inhaled deeply, making her own breath audible. "And out through your mouth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She didn't touch Isabella's chest or try to move her, knowing that could make it worse. Her entire focus was on being an anchor in the woman's terrifying storm. She guided her through several more breaths, her voice a steady, rhythmic mantra. Slowly, agonizingly, the frantic heaving of Isabella's chest began to subside. The wild panic in her eyes softened into exhausted confusion. "That's it," Elena soothed. "You're doing wonderfully." She motioned to another waitress. "Maria, can you get me a glass of cold water and one of those peppermint candies from the jar?" Peppermint could help with nausea, and the simple act of focusing on a taste could ground someone. By the time the paramedics burst through the door, their heavy boots loud on the tile. Isabella was sitting up, sipping the water Elena held for her. She was still pale and shaken, but she was breathing normally. They began their assessment, asking questions, checking her vitals. Elena stepped back, melting into the background as the professionals took over. Her heart was still hammering against her ribs, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. She saw Sal explaining what happened, gesticulating wildly. She felt the eyes of the other patrons on her, some with admiration, others with morbid curiosity. She ignored them all, her gaze fixed on the frail old woman being helped onto a gurney. Just as they were wheeling her out, Isabella's eyes found Eleanor's across the crowded room. She lifted a weak hand, her lips forming 2 silent words. "Thank you." Eleanor simply nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She began picking up the broken pieces of the teacup, her hands shaking slightly now that it was all over. It was just another Tuesday. A little more dramatic than most, but still just a day. She had a long night of cleaning offices ahead of her. She had bills to pay. Life, she thought, would go on unchanged. She had never been more wrong. As the ambulance doors closed with a final definitive thud, a sleek black sedan, a Bentley Mulsanne, purred to a stop directly behind it. The car was so out of place in front of the Silver Spoon Diner that it seemed to have materialized from another dimension. Its windows were tinted to an impenetrable black, reflecting the diner's cheap neon sign in a distorted high-gloss sheen. A man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit emerged from the driver's side, but it was the figure who stepped out of the back that commanded the attention of the universe. He was tall and lean with sharp cheekbones and dark hair swept back from his forehead. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, were fixed on the ambulance with a searing intensity. This was Julian Sterling, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in the financial world. At 34, he had inherited, and then exponentially grown, a global logistics empire, Sterling Enterprises. He was a titan of industry, a man for whom time was measured in millions of dollars per minute. He moved with an urgent grace, his expensive leather shoes silent on the wet pavement. He conferred briefly with the paramedics, his expression a mask of controlled anxiety. When they let him see his mother in the back of the ambulance, the mask cracked for just a fraction of a second, revealing a raw filial terror that was profoundly human. Elena watched this scene unfold through the diner's window, a dish rag in her hand. She saw the man's expensive suit, his air of absolute authority. That must be her son, she thought. He was clearly a man of immense wealth and power. It made Isabella's quiet, unassuming demeanor all the more puzzling. The ambulance pulled away its siren, silent for now, and the Bentley followed close behind. Elena was left standing in the lingering quiet of the diner, the smell of antiseptic faintly hanging in the air. Sal clapped her on the back. "Kid, you were amazing. I would have just stood there like a dope." Elena shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone would do." But no one else had. They had just watched. Life snapped back to its normal grinding rhythm. The next 2 days were a blur of double shifts, microwaved dinners, and a late-night call with Maya's doctor discussing a new prohibitively expensive medication. The incident with Isabella began to feel like a strange dream. On Friday, during the lunch rush, the Bentley returned. It parked in the same spot. This time, only the man in the charcoal suit got out. He entered the diner, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Eleanor. He approached her table where she was taking an order, waiting patiently and silently until she was finished. "Miss Rostova?" he asked, his voice polite but devoid of warmth. "Yes." "My name is Arthur Harrison. I am Mr. Sterling's personal assistant. He has asked me to give you this." He handed her a thick, cream-colored envelope. It bore the simple, elegant insignia of a stylized S. Elena wiped her hands on her apron before taking it. Inside was a stack of crisp $100 bills. She quickly counted. $5,000. Tucked behind the cash was a business card. Julian Sterling, CEO, Sterling Enterprises. Elena's breath caught in her throat. $5,000. It was more than she made in 2 months. It was enough to cover Maya's medication for the next quarter. It was a lifeline, but it felt wrong, impersonal. A transaction. "Please tell Mr. Sterling thank you," she said, her voice strained. "But this is too much. I didn't do anything." Mr. Harrison's expression didn't change. "Mr. Sterling feels it is an appropriate gesture of gratitude for your assistance with his mother. He insists." There was a finality in his tone that allowed for no argument. He gave a slight formal nod and turned to leave. Elena stood there holding an amount of money that could solve so many of her problems, yet she felt a strange sense of being dismissed. She had connected with Isabella on a human level, calming her panic with empathy and care. This felt like being paid off, like her genuine concern had been reclassified as a service rendered. She pushed the feeling down. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. That evening, for the first time in months, she paid a medical bill without having to check her bank account 3 times. She bought Maya the expensive brand of vitamins her doctor recommended. She even treated herself to a new pair of comfortable work shoes, her old ones worn through at the soles. The money made her life easier, but it didn't make it quiet. A week later, another summons came. This time it wasn't an envelope of cash. It was a phone call from Mr. Harrison. "Miss Rostova," his clipped voice said through the receiver. "Mr. Sterling requests your presence at his office this afternoon. A car will be sent for you at 3 o'clock. It wasn't a request. It was a command. "His office." "What for?" Elena asked, her stomach twisting into a knot. "He wishes to speak with you personally," was the only explanation offered. Elena's mind raced. Had she done something wrong? Was he unhappy with something? Maybe his mother had taken a turn for the worse. The uncertainty was terrifying. Punctually at 3, the Bentley was outside her small, run-down apartment building, looking like a spaceship that had landed in a junkyard. As she was driven through the city, towards the gleaming steel and glass monolith that was Sterling Tower, Elena felt a growing sense of dread. This was a world she didn't belong in, and she had a terrible feeling she was about to find out why she had been brought there. Sterling Tower was less a building and more a declaration of dominance over the city's skyline. Its lobby was a cavern of polished black marble and silent, intimidating art installations. The air itself seemed filtered, smelling of nothing but money and power. Elena, in her best and only blazer and a simple pair of slacks, felt as conspicuous as a stray cat in a palace. Mr. Harrison met her at the reception desk and escorted her to a private elevator. The ride to the top floor was unnervingly silent and swift. Her ears popped as they ascended into the clouds. The doors opened directly into a vast office that seemed to float above the city. 3 of the 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of Oak Ridge below. The 4th wall was lined with bookshelves, and in the center sat a desk of dark, gleaming mahogany that was larger than Eleanor's kitchen table. And behind it sat Julian Sterling. He didn't get up. He simply watched her approach, his stormy grey eyes tracking her every move. The intense, worried man she had seen outside the ambulance was gone. In his place was a cool, calculating businessman. "Miss Rostova, thank you for coming," he said, his voice a low baritone that matched the room's intimidating atmosphere. He gestured to a single leather chair positioned in front of his desk. It felt less like an invitation and more like placing a specimen under a microscope. Elena sat her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Mr. Sterling, I hope your mother is recovering well." "She's stable, thank you." His tone was clipped, dismissive of the pleasantries. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "I'll be direct. My mother's well-being is my absolute priority. Her episode at your diner was alarming. Your intervention was, according to the paramedics, timely and effective." "I was just glad I could help," Elena said quietly. Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed. You were remarkably calm, almost professionally so, and your methods, the breathing exercises, the peppermint, were quite specific. It made me curious." A cold tendril of unease snaked its way up Elena's spine. "My younger sister is sick. I've spent a lot of time in hospitals. I've picked things up." "Yes, Maya Rostova," he said, and the casual way he spoke her sister's name sent a shock wave through Elena. "Cystic fibrosis, diagnosed at age 6, currently under the care of Dr. Evans at Oak Ridge General. You are her sole guardian and provider." Elena stared at him, her heart starting to pound. How do you know that?" He ignored her question, his gaze unwavering. "You work 2 jobs, waitress at the Silver Spoon, annual income, approximately $28,000. Cleaner for Omnicorp Services, approximately $19,000. Your combined income is $47,000 before taxes. Maya's primary medication, Trikafta, has a copay of over $3,000 a month under your current insurance plan, not to mention doctor visits and hospitalizations. You have approximately $72,000 in medical debt and are 3 months behind on your rent." Every word was a hammer blow, stripping her life bare and laying it out on his polished desk. He knew everything. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crept up her neck and burned her cheeks. He hadn't just been grateful, he had been suspicious. He had investigated her. "You had me investigated," she said, her voice a tight whisper of disbelief and fury. "I am a wealthy man, Miss Rostova," he replied, his tone unapologetically matter-of-fact. "When a stranger with significant financial troubles suddenly renders a crucial service to my mother, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in due diligence." The implication was disgusting. He thought she had somehow orchestrated the event, or that her kindness was a calculated ploy to get money from him. The $5,000 wasn't a thank you. It was a test. Anger, pure and hot, surged through her, eclipsing her fear and embarrassment. She stood up, her chair scraping slightly against the marble floor. "How dare you?" she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You think because you have money, you have the right to dig through my life, to look at my family's pain and my struggles, as if they're entries on a balance sheet. You think my first instinct when I see an elderly woman collapsing is to check her bank account. She leaned forward, her hands gripping the edge of his massive desk. That woman in the diner wasn't Mrs. Sterling, the mother of a billionaire. She was Isabella, a sweet, scared woman who couldn't breathe. And I helped her because she was a human being in distress. It's what people are supposed to do. I'm sorry if that concept is so foreign in a world like yours that you had to hire a private investigator to understand it. She was breathing heavily, her heart racing. She had just yelled at one of the most powerful men in the city. She could be fired from both her jobs with a single phone call from him. But in that moment, she didn't care. He had violated her, reducing her act of compassion to a vulgar monetary scheme. For the first time, Julian Sterling looked taken aback. Her raw, indignant fury was clearly not what he had expected. He had anticipated tears or perhaps a clumsy denial. He had not anticipated this fierce, unwavering defense of her own integrity. He was silent for a long moment, his grey eyes searching her face as if seeing her for the first time. The mask of the cold CEO had slipped, and for a fleeting instant, she saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Uncertainty. Maybe even a sliver of shame. "I didn't do it for your money," Elena said, her voice dropping to a low, intense conclusion. "And you can keep your job offers or whatever it is you were planning. I don't want anything from you." She turned on her heel and walked towards the elevator, her back ramrod straight, leaving Julian Sterling alone in his silent glass-walled fortress, surrounded by his power and his suspicion. Elena's defiant exit was powered by pure adrenaline and righteous anger. The elevator ride down felt like a slow, agonizing descent back to reality. By the time she stepped out into the opulent lobby, her knees were shaking. What had she just done? She had insulted a man who could likely ruin her with a flick of his wrist. The fear came rushing back, cold and sickening. She half expected to be stopped by security, but no one bothered her. She walked out of Sterling Tower and back into the real world, the city air feeling thick and dirty after the sterile atmosphere of the penthouse. She didn't wait for the car that had brought her. She walked to the nearest bus stop, her mind a whirlwind of fury and panic. She spent the next 2 days in a state of high anxiety, waiting for the axe to fall. Every phone call made her jump. Every new customer at the diner seemed like a potential spy. But nothing happened. Her manager Sal remained his usual grumpy but fair self. Her cleaning supervisor didn't mention a thing. It was as if her explosive confrontation with Julian Sterling had never happened. On the 3rd day, a package arrived at her apartment. It wasn't from Sterling Enterprises. The return address was from a prestigious medical clinic on the other side of the state, the Ashton Center for Pulmonary Health, a place famous for its cutting-edge cystic fibrosis research and treatment, a place she and Maya could only ever dream of. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a thick file. It was a complete medical dossier for Maya. At the top was a letter addressed to Elena. "Miss Rostova, please accept my sincerest apology for the nature of our last meeting. My methods were invasive and my assumptions were insulting. Your response was illuminating. My due diligence, as I called it, did more than just reveal your financial hardships. It also revealed your character. It showed a history of unwavering dedication to your sister, a spotless work record, and no evidence of the kind of opportunism I so callously suspected. It showed me a person who, despite having every reason to be bitter, chose to be kind. My mother Isabella has been asking about you constantly. She remembers your voice and your calm demeanor, not the panic of the moment. She has expressed a wish to see you again." She is currently recuperating at her home, and she is lonely. Therefore, I have a proposal. It is not charity, but a job offer. I would like to hire you as a personal companion for my mother. Your duties would be light reading to her, accompanying her on short walks in the garden, providing conversation and company. Your salary would be $150,000 a year. You would have your own quarters on the estate grounds, should you choose to live there, large enough for you and Maya. Furthermore, enclosed you will find confirmation that Maya has been accepted into the top treatment program at the Ashton Center. A team of the best specialists in the field is waiting to take her case. Sterling Enterprises will cover every single cost treatment medication, travel accommodation, for as long as she needs it. This is not contingent on your acceptance of the job offer. This is being done regardless. Consider it a down payment on my apology. I understand your hesitation and your pride, but please consider this not for my sake, but for my mother's and for your sister's. Isabella needs a friend. Maya deserves the best care in the world. Sincerely, Julian Sterling. Eleanor sank onto her worn-out sofa, the papers spread out around her. It was an offer that was impossible to comprehend. It wasn't just a lifeline, it was a whole new life. The best doctors for Maya, an end to her crushing debt, an end to the grueling double shifts. But her pride still smarted. The job was a golden cage, an arrangement born from his guilt and her poverty. Could she work for a man who had thought so little of her? Could she stand to be in his orbit, a constant reminder of his misjudgment and her desperation? The dilemma was agonizing. Her mind screamed at her to refuse to maintain her dignity, but her heart, which ached every time she saw Maya struggle for breath, knew there was only one real choice. To refuse this would be to sacrifice her sister's health for her own pride, and that was a price she could never pay. She picked up her phone, her fingers hovering over the number on Julian Sterling's business card. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. She was no longer just Eleanor Rostova, the tired waitress. She was about to step into the lion's den. But this time, she was doing it on her own terms, not for the money or the power, but for the only person in the world who mattered more than her own pride, her sister. With a final resolute tap, she made the call. "Mr. Harrison," she said, when the assistant answered. "Please tell Mr. Sterling I accept his offer. I'll start on Monday." The Sterling estate was located 30 miles outside of Oak Ridge, a sprawling expanse of emerald lawns, ancient oak trees, and meticulously manicured gardens hidden from the world by a high stone wall. The main house was a grand stone-faced manor that looked like it had been plucked from the English countryside. Elena's new home was a charming two-bedroom guest house, nestled beside a shimmering blue lake, far enough from the main house for privacy, but close enough for convenience. It was larger and more beautifully furnished than any place she had ever lived. Maya was ecstatic. The news of her acceptance at the Ashton Center had brought a light back to her eyes that Elena hadn't seen in years. The initial consultation was in 2 weeks, and for the first time they spoke about the future with hope instead of fear. Elena's first day was nerve-wracking. She expected formality and stiffness, but when she was shown into a sun-drenched sitting room in the main house, she found Isabella Sterling sitting by the window, not as a billionaire's matriarch, but as the same kind woman from the diner. "Elena, my dear," Isabella said, her face lighting up with a warm, genuine smile. "I am so very glad you came." There was no awkwardness, no mention of the money or the circumstances. Isabella simply wanted to talk. She asked about Elena's life, about Maya, about her dreams. In turn, she shared stories of her own life, of her late husband, and of a mischievous young Julian who used to hide frogs in the housekeeper's pockets. Elena quickly discovered that her job was less of a job and more of a friendship. They would read poetry aloud, Isabella's soft voice filling the room. They would take slow walks through the magnificent rose garden, Isabella pointing out her favorite blooms. They would play cards, Isabella cheating with a playful wink that made Eleanor laugh. In Isabella, Eleanor found a maternal figure she had desperately missed since her own mother's passing years ago. The old woman was sharp funny and possessed a deep well of empathy. She understood without ever being told the weight Elena carried on her shoulders. Julian was a scarce presence. He left for the city before dawn and returned long after dark. When Elena did see him, their interactions were brief and formal. He would inquire politely after his mother nod at Elena and disappear into his study. The air between them was thick with the unspoken memory of their confrontation in his office. He was courteous, but distant. The apology in his letter seemed to belong to a different man. One evening, about a month into her new role, Elena was reading in the guest house when she saw Julian walking by the lake. He wasn't in his usual power suit, but in a simple sweater and jeans. He looked lost. He stood at the water's edge, skipping stones across the surface, his shoulders slumped. On an impulse, Elena made a cup of tea, the same Earl Grey Isabella favored, and walked out to meet him. She approached cautiously, not wanting to intrude. "Mr. Sterling." He turned, startled. His face in the fading twilight was unguarded, showing the exhaustion he usually kept so well hidden. "Elena," he said, his voice softer than she was used to. "You don't have to call me Mr. Sterling. Julian is fine." She handed him the mug of tea. "I saw the light. Thought you might be cold." He accepted it, his fingers brushing hers. A small, unexpected spark passed between them. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a few moments, watching the last rays of sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "How is she?" he asked quietly. "Really? She's stronger every day," Eleanor answered honestly. "She laughs a lot. She told me today that having me here is like having a daughter again. She misses you, though. She worries that you work too much." A shadow crossed Julian's face. "My father built this empire. I feel the weight of it every day. The pressure to not just maintain it, but to grow it. It doesn't leave much room for anything else." "There has to be," Elena said, her voice gentle. "Or what's it all for, all this?" She gestured to the vast, beautiful estate. "It's just an empty palace if you don't have time to live in it." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and the distance in his eyes seemed to shrink. He saw not just his mother's companion or the waitress from the diner, but a woman of quiet strength and profound wisdom. He saw the person who had stood up to him, who had chosen compassion over fear. "You're right," he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time. "My mother says you're good for her. I'm beginning to think she's right." It was a small moment, but it was a shift. The wall between them had begun to crumble. Meanwhile, back at the Silver Spoon, diner life had not been so quiet. Elena's sudden departure and sensational new job were the talk of the staff. Most were happy for her, but one person was consumed by a bitter, corrosive envy. Chloe, another waitress who had always seen Elena as a rival, watched from afar. She saw the news reports of Maya's acceptance into the Ashton Center, funded by a generous anonymous benefactor. She saw the occasional paparazzi photo of Elena entering a luxury car. Chloe seethed with resentment. She believed Elena had played a brilliant trick faking her way into the Sterling fortune. In her twisted view, Elena hadn't earned her new life. She had stolen it. And Chloe, who felt she deserved so much more than slinging hash in a greasy diner, decided she was going to get a piece of it, or burn Elena's new world to the ground, trying. Her mind began to spin a web of deceit, a plan to expose the truth about Elena Rostova, and reclaim what she felt was rightfully hers. Chloe's jealousy festered for weeks, mutating into a meticulous, venomous plan. She knew she couldn't simply accuse Elena of being a fraud. She needed something that would strike at the core of Julian Sterling's deepest fear being manipulated. She needed to make Elena look not just like an opportunist, but like a common criminal. Her opportunity came on a busy Saturday night at the diner. Sal, the manager, was overwhelmed, and in a moment of distraction, he left the key in the cash register while he went to deal with a crisis in the kitchen. Chloe saw her chance. With practiced ease, she pocketed $300 from the till, ensuring she was out of the direct line of sight of the old, grainy security camera. The next morning, Sal was in a panic over the missing cash. Chloe feigned sympathy. "That's terrible, Sal. Who could have done it?" Then she planted the seed. "You know, Elena was always struggling. She used to talk about her sister's bills all the time. I'm not saying it was her, but she was desperate." She let the poison sink in. Later that day, she made an anonymous call to Sterling Enterprises. She didn't ask for Julian. She asked for the head of his personal security, a name she'd found through some online digging. "I have some information about Elena Rostova," she said, her voice disguised with a false, breathy concern. "I used to work with her. I think you should know that she has a history of theft. Money went missing from the diner all the time when she was working here. It only stopped after she left. In fact, a police report was just filed this morning about another shortage. I'm worried she's taking advantage of that poor old woman." It was a brilliant lie, mixing a kernel of truth, the missing money, with a mountain of fabrication. To a security team trained to be paranoid, it was a major red flag. The information traveled up the chain of command with terrifying speed, landing on Julian's desk in a stark, confidential report. "Allegation of habitual theft. Elena Rostova." For Julian, it was like a bucket of ice water to the face. He had let his guard down. He had started to see Elena as a person of integrity, someone different. He had begun to enjoy their brief, quiet conversations by the lake. This report ripped all of that away, reawakening his deepest suspicions. Had his initial gut feeling been right all along? Had her fierce denial in his office just been a masterful performance? His mind raced back to her debts, her desperation. A skilled con artist would know exactly how to play on his sympathies. He felt a surge of cold fury directed as much at himself for his gullibility as it was at Eleanor. He didn't fire her immediately. That would be too simple. He needed to be certain. He needed to confront her. That evening he found her in the rose garden with his mother. They were laughing, Isabella pointing to a picture in a book while Eleanor smiled. The scene was so idyllic, so pure, that it almost made him doubt the report. Almost. "Mother," he said, his voice hard as steel, "could you excuse us? I need to speak with Eleanor privately." Isabella, sensing the sudden tension, looked between her son's grim face and Eleanor's confused one. "Of course, dear." She gave Eleanor's hand a reassuring squeeze before her nurse escorted her back inside. Once they were alone, the warmth of the evening sun seemed to vanish. Julian turned to Eleanor, his eyes devoid of any of the softness she had recently started to see in them. "We received a report today," he began, his voice dangerously low. "It concerns your previous employment at the Silver Spoon Diner." Eleanor frowned, confused. "The diner. What about it?" "It seems there were frequent cash shortages while you were employed there. Coincidentally, they stopped the moment you left. And just yesterday, a police report was filed for another $300 that went missing. He let the words hang in the air, heavy and accusatory. Elena stared at him, the color draining from her face. It took a moment for the monstrous implication to sink in. You think I stole money? The timing is suspicious, wouldn't you agree? He shot back, his voice laced with the bitterness of betrayal. A desperate woman with mountains of debt suddenly finds herself next to my mother. Then I find out she may have a history of theft. It paints a very clear picture. The shock gave way to a profound, soul-crushing hurt. It was worse than their first meeting. Then he had been a suspicious stranger. Now she thought they had started to build a bridge of trust. He had just demolished it. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging. But they were tears of anger, not of weakness. "The picture it paints," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "is that you have learned nothing. You are so insulated by your wealth that you cannot see a person, only a motive. You look at me, and you don't see someone who held your mother's hand while she was terrified. You see a line item in a risk assessment report." She took a step closer, her gaze locking with his. "I never ever stole a single cent in my life. I may have been poor, but I have never been a thief. If you believe I am, then there is nothing more to say." She wouldn't defend herself further. She wouldn't plead or beg. Her integrity was all she had ever truly owned, and she refused to put it on trial for him. "You can have your security escort me out," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "I'll go pack my things." She turned and walked away, leaving Julian standing alone in the garden, the damning report in his hand, and her heartbroken words echoing in the silence. He had his proof, his confirmation. So why did he feel like he had just made the biggest mistake of his life? Julian stood frozen in the rose garden, the fragrant air suddenly thick and suffocating. The scent of blooming peace. Roses, his mother's favorite, seemed a bitter mockery. Elena's words, her expression of profound, shattered trust, had struck him with the force of a physical blow. He looked down at the security report in his hand. The crisp paper felt flimsy, the typed words hollow and meaningless compared to the raw, undeniable truth he had seen in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had finally allowed themselves to feel safe, only to be betrayed by the very person who had built the sanctuary. His first instinct, the cold corporate reflex that had guided his entire adult life, was to retreat, to analyze, to treat this as a problem to be solved. But this wasn't a hostile takeover or a market fluctuation. This was a catastrophic failure of human judgment, his own. He turned and walked back toward the main house, his long strides eating up the manicured lawn. The perfect, orderly world he had built around himself suddenly felt like a prison of his own making, a prison of paranoia. He swept past a startled housekeeper and into his study, the door closing behind him with a heavy, definitive click. He threw the report onto his vast mahogany desk, the papers scattering. It was garbage. An anonymous tip. Circumstantial evidence. Julian Sterling, a man who demanded irrefutable data before acquiring a company, had been ready to condemn a person based on a vindictive, faceless phone call. His mother's words from a few days ago came back to him, sharp and prophetic. "Trust your heart, Julian. The balance sheets can't tell you everything about a person's worth." He had failed that test spectacularly. With a surge of desperate energy, he grabbed his phone and dialed his head of security. "I want the raw security footage from the Silver Spoon Diner from Saturday night, all of it. Don't send me a summary, I want the full video files. And I want the name and direct line of the officer who took the theft report from the manager. I want to know exactly what was said. Get it done. Now." His commands were clipped, his voice a low growl of urgency. While he waited, he paced the length of his study, a caged tiger of his own creation. He stopped in front of a silver-framed photograph on his bookshelf. It was of him and his mother taken a year ago. She was laughing, her head tilted back, full of life. He thought of her now, her renewed joy, the light that had returned to her eyes. That light was named Elena. Elena, who patiently listened to the same stories 100 times. Elena, who knew exactly how his mother liked her tea without asking. Elena, who had brought laughter back into the quiet, sterile halls of this mansion. And he had just ripped that away. He went to see his mother. He found her in her sitting room, the book she'd been sharing with Elena lying forgotten in her lap. She looked up at him, her expression not angry, but deeply disappointed. "What did you say to that poor girl, Julian?" she asked, her voice laced with a weary sadness. He sank into a chair opposite her, the weight of his actions, a physical pressure on his chest. "I accused her of something terrible." "And do you believe it?" Isabella pressed her eyes, searching his. Julian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "I don't know what to believe. The evidence..." "Evidence?" His mother cut in her voice, suddenly sharp as glass. "Or an excuse to indulge your worst instincts. Your father was a brilliant man, Julian, but he trusted no one. He saw plots in every shadow, and it made him a lonely man in a very large house. I see you walking that same path. I have spent nearly every day for the last 2 months with Elena. I have seen her heart. When the cook's son was sick, she spent her day off making him soup. When my arthritis was flaring, she sat and massaged my hands for an hour, never complaining. She is kinder, more honest, and more full of grace than anyone I have met in a very long time. If you let your paranoia chase that girl away, you will not be losing an employee. You will be losing a rare and precious treasure from this house, and I'm not sure it will ever be replaced." Her words hit him harder than any accusation. It wasn't just about being wrong. It was about being blind. Just then, Mr. Harrison entered a tablet in his hand, his face grim. "Sir, we have the footage and the call logs." Julian straightened his focus, absolute. "Show me." Harrison played the first video. "This is the main camera. The angle is poor as the source indicated. It doesn't show the register clearly." He swiped. However, the diner has a secondary camera covering the back exit to monitor staff taking breaks. He played the second clip. There, amidst the frantic energy of the dinner rush, was the undeniable truth. He saw Chloe Jennings, her face a mask of nervous greed, glance furtively towards the kitchen. She moved out of frame for a second, then reappeared, moving quickly towards the back door. Just before she pushed it open, she slipped a thick wad of cash from her apron into her purse. The movement was small, guilty, and utterly damning. The anonymous tip was traced. Harrison continued, his voice flat. It came from a burner phone, purchased less than a mile from Chloe Jennings's apartment. And the officer's report confirms the manager Sal was hesitant to accuse anyone. It was Miss Jennings who pushed him, creating a narrative that implicated Miss Rostova's recent departure. The truth was a harsh, unforgiving light. It illuminated not only Chloe's treachery, but the full, ugly scope of his own failure. Shame, hot and profound, washed over him. He walked to the guest house, each step heavier than the last. The door was slightly ajar. Through it, he saw Elena's 2 suitcases standing by the door like sentinels of her departure. The sight was a punch to the gut. He had done this. He had taken her hard-won stability and shattered it. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, her back to him, staring blankly at the wall. He knocked softly on the doorframe. Elena. She didn't turn her shoulders tensing. If you're here to make sure I haven't stolen the silver, don't worry, I'm leaving. Her voice was brittle, devoid of the warmth he had come to know. No, he said, his own voice hoarse as he stepped inside. Please don't go. He stopped in the middle of the room, feeling like an intruder in the life he was wrecking. I was wrong. There are no words to describe how completely and unforgivably wrong I was. He explained everything. His voice low and rushed the footage, the phone trace Chloe's bitter, jealous scheme. He didn't spare himself detailing his own pathetic leap to suspicion his readiness to believe the worst. I let my fear of being taken advantage of blind me to who you are. He finished, his voice raw with sincerity. I came into your life, like a storm dug through your privacy, and accused you of the very thing you are incapable of being. I don't blame you for hating me. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Elena finally turned to look at him, and the hollow devastation in her eyes made him flinch. You made me feel like a criminal in my own home, Julian. Do you have any idea what that's like, to finally be able to breathe, to not worry about the next bill to watch my sister get hopeful, and then to have it all threatened because the man in charge decided I fit a convenient, ugly profile he had in his head? I know, he said, his voice barely a whisper, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. He took a hesitant step closer. The police are dealing with Chloe. Sal has been informed. The job is still yours, of course, for as long as you want it, and Maya's care is secure. That will never change. But I understand if you can't stand to be here, if you can't stand to even look at me. She was quiet for a long time, her gaze searching his face, looking past the wealth and the power. She saw no trace of the CEO or the cold interrogator. She saw a man stripped bare by his own shame, his eyes filled with a desperate, genuine remorse. She saw the man who skipped stones on the lake. Slowly she shook her head. I'm not leaving, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I won't let someone like Chloe, or even your worst instincts, chase me away from your mother. She took a breath, her gaze unwavering. And I'm staying because I think the man who just apologized to me is the real you, the man your mother always talks about. I'd like to get to know him better, if he'll let me. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled him, washed over Julian. He had been given a gift. He in no way deserved a second chance. He offered her a small, hopeful smile. I'd like that too. He reached out not to take her hand, but simply opening his palm in a gesture of peace of offering. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in his. It wasn't a transaction or an agreement. It was a fragile pact, a promise to begin again, built not on the ashes of his suspicion, but on the simple, unshakable foundation of a single decent gesture in a diner on a rainy afternoon. A gesture that had, against all odds, saved more than one life that day. Elena's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth isn't measured by our bank accounts, but by our actions in moments we think no one is watching. Her simple act of compassion wasn't a lottery ticket. It was a reflection of her character, a character that was tested, doubted, and ultimately vindicated. The life-changing reward wasn't just the money or the security for her sister. It was finding trust, respect, and love in the most unexpected of places. It shows that kindness is a currency that can break down the highest walls, and that even in a world that often feels cold and transactional, a genuine human connection is the most valuable asset of all. What did you think of Elena's journey? Could you have forgiven Julian for his suspicion? Let us know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs a reminder of the power of kindness, And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible real-life stories.